Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Boston Harbor Now, January 24th Harbor Use Public Forum. Please say hello in the chat by sending a message to everyone with your name. You can click the square with your name or your photo and rename yourself. Include your affiliation and pronouns, please. While this meeting is recorded, we want this to feel conversational. Feel free to use the chat, raise your hand to ask questions, but if you don't want to be recorded, you should keep your mic and camera off. Right now, everyone should be on mute, and Al, we can start in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Alrighty, Al, it's 8:33, and I think people entering has started to slow down, so I think we can get started.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. Good morning, everybody. I'm Al Rain. I'm the co-chair of Boston Harbor Now's Policy and Planning Committee, and I'll be the host for this morning's forum. Boston Harbor Now convenes these meetings to enable public discussions about projects happening around the waterfront, whether those projects are led by the public sector or the private sector, sometimes both. If this is your first time at a Harbor Use Forum, welcome aboard. And if you've attended before, as I know many of you have, we're glad to see you back. Word about Boston Harbor Now. We're a nonprofit focused on ensuring that the waterfront and the harbor islands are increasingly prepared for climate change and are providing welcoming and inclusive open space and indoor uses to people from all over Boston, all over greater Boston. We call this vision of an equitable, resilient, and accessible waterfront Harborwalk 2.0. Our work spans a wide range of issues, from commenting on waterfront development projects to planning for future ferry service to bringing underserved communities out to enjoy the harbor islands. Boston Harbor Now believes strongly that the waterfront belongs to all of us, and that by bringing together interactive conversations like this one, we can help ensure that projects are both inclusive and resilient. This morning, we're excited to hear about one of the really exciting new projects planned in the harbor, and it's at the southern end of Fort Point Channel. We'd like to begin by doing two quick polls. If you've been to these forums, you know that we begin this way to learn more about who's with us today. So the first question is, where are you joining from? And just pick whichever is most applicable. The choices are, I live or work in Fort Point. I live or work in another Boston neighborhood. I live or work in the greater Boston area, or I live or work further afield. And the second one is, how familiar are you with this project, 232 A Street? And the choices are very familiar. You've been following it closely. Somewhat familiar. You've attended a meeting or two. A little familiar. You know the area, but not this particular project. Or not familiar at all. This is your first time hearing about it. So if you can respond to those, we'll get a quick look at who's coming from where. And we have results. Looks like about half the people who've joined us so far live or work in Boston, but not necessarily in Fort Point. About 20% are from Fort Point. That's great. And everyone else is elsewhere in Greater Boston or even further afield. And there's obviously a lot of familiarity on the second item. Over half the people who responded say that they're very familiar and have been following this particular project closely, which is great, which will make for a very good discussion. So let me say a word of introduction about the project, then I'll introduce the team, and then I'll stop talking. This project, as obviously many of you know, is located along Fort Point Channel toward the southern end, between Gillette and the upcoming Channelside development. 232 A Street, the project reimagines a parking lot as a new lab office and R&D building and a 1.2 acre waterfront park. Today we'll be joined by 4 presenters who'll be sharing the proposed plans. Leading the team is Lauren Ferrando from Tishman Speyer, the developer. Morning, Lauren. And on her team are Meep Keller and Craig Mutter from Payette and Ian Downing from Mick Young Kim Design. After their presentation, we'll open it up for conversation and Q&A. And Lauren, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Al. And thank you very much to the Boston Harbor Now team, Kelly and Al and all. It's such an awesome avenue to have. And we're lucky to be here with you all this morning to spotlight the 232A project specifically. With Al's introduction, I don't need to give too much of one, but Lauren Ferrando, I am the project manager for Tishman Speyer Breakthrough, so representing the ownership of 232A, and I'm joined by our brilliant design team at Payette and Mick Young Kim Design. And with that poll, I'm going to dive in and give some context that's probably more catered to those who are less familiar on the call to make sure we're bringing everyone along and on the same page. So some of this contextual information will be highly repetitive to a handful of you on the call. So that being said, the project we're talking about is a 2.4 acre site along the Fort Point Channel. It's subject to the 100 acres master plan PDA and the South Boston Municipal Harbor Plan. It's located right between the Gillette manufacturing facility and the recently approved 244 to 84 A Street project. We'll run through, again, some kind of very quick background and then get into talking about our waterfront park, resiliency improvements that we've got planned, and then dive into the ground floor experience and open it up for Q&A. That being said, please jump in with questions or comments as we go. Would love to make it more of a conversation. So stop us whenever. So to start, here's a photo of what the site looks like today. This would be taken if you're standing on the Harborwalk looking towards Fort Point. Another view, this time standing across from A Street, looking across the channel towards downtown Boston. The 100 acres master plan PDA and the South Boston Municipal Harbor Plan prescribe allowable height, massings, and use for the project. And we, have set forth a development plan that is consistent with what's been set forth in both of those programs, with one caveat. So the 100 acres master plan contemplated 2 buildings, one at 150 feet, one at 100 feet. we are proposing just one building at 150 feet, and instead of building that second building, have converted that building area to additional waterfront park space, which we are particularly excited about, to be able to bring some activated green space that's nearly 3 times what the PDA anticipated. And there are a few unique characteristics on our site, many of which are very apparent with the MassDOT head house, and some of which are a little bit more below grade and not as apparent if you're just walking along the Harborwalk. But the I-90 tunnel cuts through our site, so that's this gray outline with blue dashing kind of denoted here. And with the tunnel, we have the head house structure that actually has the emergency access stairs down to the tunnel, and an associated access easement as shown with this red truck turnaround here that we'll want to make sure that we're accommodating. The Gillette pump house is next to our parcel. We have the continuance of Necco Street, and I think that's probably it in terms of unique features. So next up for our general development programs, we all know what we're talking about. In addition to that park, which is roughly 1.5 acres of total public realm, 1.2 of that will be true park, the balance being streets and sidewalks. We'll be building this building, which will be a 9-story lab and office use building with mixed use on the ground floor, and those mixed uses can include, cultural, civic, and/or retail. It'll be roughly 335,000 square feet, so well below the PDA massing. In terms of community benefits, we're really excited about what we think this project will put forth, and these have been also dramatically improved with thoughtful comments from the public and Boston Harbor Now and other stakeholders. So we've really tried to incorporate those and think it's landed in just an even better place. I can kind of read through some of the highlights that have been impacted by particularly those comments, perhaps. The first of which would be widening the Harborwalk and South Bay Harbor Trail. So originally that was around 18 feet to kind of pick up and connect where the Channelside project will be in terms of overall dimension. We have widened the portion on our site to about 22 feet. That'll be comprised of about a 12-foot pedestrian zone and 10-foot cyclist zone. We'll also be providing ancillary support for public enjoyment of the waterfront. And so basically think of things that actually make using the channel or being around, hanging around in the park for an extended period of time practical and possible. So easy access to public restrooms right off the front entrance in the lobby, a drinking water station that will be similarly, easy access close to the front entrance, and storage for dragon boats, which we know is a very prominent use on the Fort Point Channel. And I believe I saw a few dragon boaters on, at least we've got Brandon, I think. And that will be provided in a location in the below grade garage. Lastly, ground floor design, which Meep will talk about momentarily, but we've really prioritized making a very porous ground floor, so minimizing back of house as much as possible to create, really activated, exciting uses on all 3 sides of the building, prioritizing doing so along the waterfront park and A Street. Another characteristic that Meep will touch on would be the arcade. So reminiscent of existing arcade spaces in Fort Point. This was just a really creative design solution from the Payette team that kind of solved a lot of things for us. It's navigating a really substantial grade change to allow, absolute accessibility across the site, despite somewhat significant 5 to 6 foot grade change. It's opened up views of the water from A Street and the Fort Point neighborhood where there wouldn't have been any, just been a solid building. again, help to make it more porous and create some spill out space for uses on the inside, create additional like really interesting nooks for public art opportunities. And again, another invitation to that waterfront park that is, we're really trying to make the focus of this development. Lastly, there'll be opportunities for public art and collaboration with local artists that are so integral to 4 Point, and standard contribution of linkage and creation of both construction and permanent jobs. In terms of resiliency and sustainability, both key tenets of this project. So many of you are probably familiar with the Resilient 4 Point Channel Infrastructure Project, which is an effort led by the City of Boston, BPDA, in conjunction with FEMA, to create a berm barrier that will span the channel and beyond. An extent of that cuts across our site. So we will be taking that plan, working with them, and improving upon it by further grading the site and raising it further than what was even contemplated in that plan. That being said, we'll be raising the entire site to 21.6 at its maximum. And since the PNF, we've raised additional portions of it closest to the waterfront to really create a higher level of protection. In terms of sustainability, we'll comply with the latest opt-in code under Article 37 of the City of Boston. And with that, we'll be exploring renewable energy on site, installing PV, which basically solar panels on our rooftop. We'll have EV-ready spaces in our garage, and really focusing on how to not only mitigate operational carbon footprint, but our embodied carbon footprint at the onset. And that'll be done by, first and foremost, the elimination of one building, but then also how we think about materiality and the construction of the building. And with that, I will pass it to my colleague, Ian.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everybody for their time this morning. We're really excited to share the information on the project open space and the design refinements that have been made. We wanted to just start by, acknowledging the site as an important inland neighborhood access to the waterfront, important connector, gateway to the 4 Point Channel, and zooming out and keeping it in mind the role in the broader city. We really want this to be a welcoming space along the waterfront for all, and encourage visitors, passerbyers, not just those living and working in the immediate vicinity, to gravitate towards here, hang out here. And, we understand our park doesn't do that alone, but really is a complement to those open spaces around. So next slide. So then zooming in a bit closer, we really started by looking at those parks that exist today, and with the A Street Park and the planned future parks with Channelside, and how can we contribute and complement those existing and planned uses. And the goal of the project is really looking to be additive to the neighborhood parks and the open space network. Next slide. Then we've set out kind of refining the design in response to feedback from the community, thoughtful stakeholders such as Boston Harbor Now, city and state agencies, and BCDC. So we'll talk through those refinements, but some of those three big buckets are the open space design changes, extensive design changes to the strategy along Necco Street, and some overall improved resiliency planning measures that we'd like to talk through. Next slide. So just wanted to share the updated plan. On screen's a comparison of the overall ENF on the left, and the current DEIR concept plan on the right, kind of showing the evolution of the site plan. We wanted to just highlight some of the main revisions based on the feedback that we've received to date. One of those is we've moved the line of protection closer to the waterfront, and provided multiple levels of protection to the park, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth towards the end of my slides. But really, a greater share of the site now protected, greater percentage of the site now above the 21.5 elevation. So we're really excited about those changes. We've provided flexible use lawn space in the location of the previous waterfront plaza, really in order to increase overall site permeability, but to respond to some of the comments about having some vegetated open space closer to the water's edge. We've removed the protruding dock component based on some site-specific constraints, as well as some other adjacent project proposals as well. You know, as Lauren mentioned, the Harborwalk and the South Bay Harbor Trail has been widened on the site by 4 feet, and we've adjusted the location of pedestrian and cycle lanes so that cycle lanes are more on the interior and eliminating moments of conflict between those two users. We've also focused on creating greater connectivity between the building and the arcade and the park, and really focused on enhancing that connectivity and the experience as you cross through. Again, I have some slides, you know, moving forward that can talk about that. We've also extended the NECO temporary condition further into the site and raised the elevation at the end of NECO to 21 along the southern end. And this adjustment really allows us to keep a flush pedestrian connection between the arcade and the open space, opens up opportunities for a few additional parking spaces on day one, but also sets the tone for development to the south and really, you know, continuing the, you know, resilient street connection to the connection to the south. We've also refined the arrival sequence and look to provide a greater sense of arrival on the southeast corner of the park. So next slide. This is a section through our waterfront plaza or open space. Really, the section's kind of conveying the multiple levels of open space at the 18.5 and the 21.5 as we approach the channel. You know, this reflects the open flexible lawn space shown with the pink umbrellas here. But we're really looking to take advantage of some of these grade changes and protective infrastructure to allow occupiable seating edges and engagement within those areas. Next slide, Lauren. And so as we talk about the arrival sequence, I think we're very excited about the evolution of the design and the opening up of views and improved connection to the waterfront based on some of the comments we've received to date. So I want to just talk through the narrative and the unfolding views that are created in the new design. So walking from A Street through the arcade, you know, we're getting a view towards the open space, you know, framing of trees and sky, and sort of indicating at the end of the arcade that there is a publicly accessible open space destination. And as we arrive at the end of the arcade, on the next slide, you know, we get a view over the open space towards the city skyline, and we'll show you a view in just a moment that kind of captures the intent with that view. And as you move towards the open space, you get the framed view towards the water across the open space, and your view shifts towards an axial view framed by landscape towards the water's edge, with a gradually more unfolding view as you walk towards the waterfront, with really an expanded view at the end, you know, elevated above the open space and the boardwalk, looking back towards the water activation and city skyline. So we're really excited about the narrative and sense of arrival, especially through the arcade. Next slide, Lauren. And just wanted to provide an overview of the updated grading approach here. On screen is a comparison again of the original ENF on the left and the current concept plan on the right. As part of the PNF-ENF, we had proposed raising the grade to a single line of protection further into the site, so roughly at the head house location, and then providing a gradual transition down towards the water. You know, through feedback from the community and discussions with the city's resiliency team and Boston Harbor Now, we've really pulled that line of protection closer to the water's edge, but also created an intermediate level of protection at the 18.5 to further protect that waterfront open space along the waterfront. Next slide. And again, just wanted to share the latest study of the Necco Street grading and intersection interim condition. The day one conditions on the left with the future condition on the right. And again, based on discussions and for all the reasons I've mentioned earlier, we've really looked to raise the end of Necco to 21, planning for the future resilient street, but also allowing ease of flush connection, ADA accessible connection from the arcade directly across to the park, and really creating this as a welcoming entry at the southeast corner of the park as well. And if you go to the next slide, again, just an example view of, when we arrive at the end of the arcade, you get this more expansive view, really frame the view back towards the city skyline. On the right side, getting a framed view down towards the water along that new southern walkway on the southern edge of the site. And then really starting to get glimpses of, especially in high tide condition, extreme high tide conditions, getting glimpses, across the open space towards the channel and the water activation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Meep, and again, happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks. Yeah, so Ian just walked us basically from Necco Street down to the water, and now I'll take you back into the arcade. So here is a view at the end of the arcade. Looking down, you can really see the game changer was raising the end of Necco Street in order to get that seamless path across and into the park. Also, the design change of having this path meander along the south end of the park really opens up that view to the water. And it's something that you can see as a destination from the end of this arcade. Here we have the idea of maybe some tables, a little terrace, a patio, try to activate the corner underneath this overhang with this beautiful view of the park. And then as we start to walk back towards the end of the arcade. So the arcade spans the entire south facade, the whole elevation, all the way back to A Street. And at the end of A Street, it actually opens up. It's about twice as wide at A Street. We really want to make sure no one misses this really cool path down to the waterfront. And you can see like what Ian was talking about, the view of the sky and the trees. And if you really zoomed in, you could maybe see, some water, but the idea is that it would be this very welcoming path through along the side of the building. Now let's talk a little bit about this, the space, the FPA space along A Street here. We really want to create a very welcoming, well-lit, generous ceilings, very porous, kind of programmatic space, really welcome you to the building, to this ground floor. And you can see, down this arcade, we have FPA and other publicly accessible space available along the entire length of the arcade. We have potential art displays, public art, and it could be storefronts, civic space, all sorts of types of FPA space. We actually have the current design for this storefront has a lot of flexibility in it. So you could either have spaces inside that have a very tall ceiling, or it could accommodate spaces that don't actually want the full height of the ceiling, but still be as welcoming as the other spaces. Here, importantly, we have these canopies along the front of the FPA space here along A Street. That canopy it's again welcoming, but also brings back the human scale because it is a generous ceiling height, of course, but this is a way to enter that FPA. Next slide, please. The floor plan, so you can see how the back of house has really been kind of minimized. We tried to keep as much open space all around the edges of the building where we would otherwise not want anything back of house. We wanted to be very open along A Street, particularly at street level, so that you could walk right in off the street, not have a tall wall or something impacting your view into the space. Then the lobby and the remainder of the publicly accessible space, those are all at a much higher elevation, and that's for resiliency. So that's at the 21.6, and you can see how that 21.6 arcade it is able to come straight across at that corner where we've kind of raised the entire site so that have that seamless transition. All the lines that you see crisscrossing the our site here, those are the different tidelands. So we have 3 different tidelands here. The Commonwealth tidelands are on Binford Street and the northwest corner. Then we have the private tidelands, which is kind of the triangle in the middle, and then landlocked tidelands at the bottom. You can see the pink spaces are the FPA, and the orange is other publicly accessible space.
Thanks, Meep and Ian.
Yeah.
And that's the end of our formal presentation. So we would love to, I'll turn it back to you, Kelly, or we can open up for questions.
Thank you guys very much. That was a great presentation, Lauren and team. So we're going to have discussion and Q&A. Kelly will be monitoring the chat, and the easiest way to ask a question is to put it in the chat. You can use the raise hand, electronic raise hand function if you'd like, and Kelly will magically watch both of those things. I would like to start this by asking the following question. The look of the building as you approach it on the A Street side is very dramatic, as the slides indicated, both in the way that it tells you to go down the arcade toward the channel, but also in the A Street elevation itself, and that very dramatic there it is, of facilities of public accommodation, so named in the sign as you approach. And it seems to me that a lot of the success of the site and the way it interacts with its neighbors will depend on how well those facilities of public accommodation work. No secret, developments around the waterfront have different levels of success in actually populating facilities of public accommodation. So I was wondering if you can give us some insight into your strategy for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question and is, like you said, absolutely critical to the success, since the whole premise of the ground floor is predicated on trying to create this really, porous, inviting, activated space, and that's nothing if we don't actually get those, all-star users to bring that to life. And doing so is challenging. There's kind of no way around that. It's very challenging, particularly for it runs the gamut. Cultural users, retail users, it's very difficult to find groups that have the economic capacity. We strive to bring those barriers down. So I think we have a few examples, what we've done in and around Boston to bring those barriers down and populate space. We really view any FPA retail user as an amenity to the building. It's certainly not an economic driver for us or projects these days. It's absolutely an amenity and something you're lucky to have. So with that, it's structuring favorable market rents that don't really look like rents as much as maybe, some type of different structure. Providing the most flexible, resilient box is something we've really focused on early on. So, today we could take guesses on what the best users might be, or the best use might be for these spaces, but that could be very different as, 244, 284A secures their ground floor activation and tenancy. We don't want to be duplicative. We're going to be responsive and complement that. And there could be a whole different slate of groups in the market and ready for space in a few years than now. So with that, we're focused on creating a vanilla box that could be many things. And for us, what that means is, as Meet mentioned, really generous ceiling heights. So we have 22 to 27 feet across this ground floor. And that really opens up a large swath of users. And that also means it can be different things over different generations. So maybe the first group in here is a performing arts studio that wants that dramatic ceiling height or that street presence. And down the line, maybe we have someone who really would benefit from a more prominent scale at the pedestrian level. We can accommodate that. Similar for resiliency concerns, raising as much of the building as we can at that 21.6, and then still meeting the street was important to us. While we meet the street, we'll certainly have, dried flood proofing and other measures in place to protect that A Street suite, but we'll also have the room, should things change over time. If you needed to raise the interior, you would still have ample ceiling height, for example. And lastly, to kind of round out this question, I have a lot of responses on it because it's a good one. We will plan to do, and we've kind of committed to this early on, it's something we want to do, an RFP for any non-commercial, so civic cultural space. And we would do that, once we are further along in the approval process and design to make sure we're not precluding groups for space that we would, be looking to occupy in a few years.
Oh, great. That was a very full answer. Thanks very much, Lauren. Kelly, I will give it back to you to conduct the Q&A. And I see we have a bunch of questions.
We do. We have a bunch of questions in the chat and also a raised hand. For now, I'm going to jump to the chat because there's a related question. Jamie and Maggie would like to know, what is other publicly accessible space?
Yes, that is a great question. Let me turn back to that. So other publicly accessible space is essentially our term to try and make this Tidelands map a little less confusing. There's two kind of purposes for these diagrams. The first is to relate it back to Chapter 91 jurisdiction, which you'll see in the upcoming DEIR filing, to translate it for that purpose. And then the second is to try and acknowledge, irrespective of the complexities of where the tidelands fall and how Chapter 91 defines things, what is this going to actually look and feel like for people living in the area, working in the building, passing by or coming here? Like, at the end of the day, it all means one thing. It's going to be retail, civic, cultural, some use where you can come in, use it, enjoy it, benefit from it. So FPA is our designation to respond to what is truly in Chapter 91 jurisdiction. And other publicly accessible areas is sort of our term to say, while you won't see it marked as formally FPA, it will have a publicly accessible use. And to kind of piggyback on that question too, Chapter 91, FPA is on Commonwealth tidelands. So 75% of your building that is in Commonwealth tidelands. That would imply, round numbers, 7,500 square feet for this project. We are, offering 70% of our total floor plate. So instead of that 7,500 square feet, we're, presenting about 25,000 square feet that will be publicly accessible. Hopefully, please ask me any follow-up questions if there's still confusion, because it is a confusing topic.
Yeah, Maggie and Jamie, if you have more questions, feel free to pop it in the chat and or raise your hand. I'm going to kick it over to Steve Hollinger, who has his hand raised, and then we'll go back to the chat. Steve, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kelly. First, I see Vivian Lee here. I appreciate that. And Vivian knows, and the folks at Boston Harbor now know that harbor use forums are an opportunity to be frank, and more frank maybe than regular public meetings. And so let me be frank. First of all, you didn't show the elevations of the building as they go down to 8th Street. And I'm kind of upset about that because this is a harbor use meeting where people involved with climate protection are engaged. So it's disappointing not to see the elevations going down to 8th Street. And that brings the point that the interior space at 8th Street is at roughly 16.5 feet, which will require continued either floodproofing or other measures, closures, et cetera. So the decision on how the floor plan looks will be based on what the long-term use of that space is at that part of the building. And that brings me to the point, this is the first time I've seen this public space as opposed to FPA space. This is the first presentation I've seen. I've been to every public meeting where it's distinguished that way. The most valuable spaces in this building, interior FPA spaces, are the ones facing west. And one is a lobby space, and now we have this new designation. The main concern I'm bringing up here is that civic and cultural space, the civic and cultural uses, are the one opportunity in the waterfront for diversity, for inclusivity, for year-round engagement by groups citywide to take these spaces. And yet I'd say we have 20 failures in the Seaport and only 2 successes, Grub Street and Fan Pier. And I can name countless failures. And one of the failures is because we have developers coming in and continually giving these wishy-washy views of how the ground floor looks. I've asked for floor plans at every single meeting, including a distinguishing where the cultural spaces that will go to the Mayor's of Office and Arts and Culture for an open RFI. I've asked every single meeting, and we're still hearing a wishy-washy, we don't know, so on and so on. And when I say frank, I want to say that the advocacy is also responsible for why we are where we are. The advocacy at the Related Beal project, for example, left us with only 15,000 square feet out of 1.2 million square feet for civic and cultural space, and only $50 per square foot for build-out costs, even though Grub Street testified that their costs were $400 per square foot for build-out. So what I'm asking here is, A, where are the floor plans? Where is the advocacy for floor plans? Where is the fit-out costs and the other carrying costs for the cultural space in this building? Why are we at this point with kind of like this very basic, this is exactly where we are in all processes till the very end. And I just would say, if you hear my voice, some, elevated concern, it's because every single project comes in. At the 50 Necco project, we lost over 10,000 square feet going from GE to national development. We lost over 10,000 square feet in civic and cultural space. No one said a word about that. And then we had a sweetheart deal for a nonprofit for the cultural space. No one said a word about that except for me publicly. Anyways, I think that at some point, Boston Harbor Now and others should say, we don't care that much about these civic and cultural uses, or we do care, and we're going to put our foot down because no one's putting their foot down here. Thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Kelly.
Mhm.
Thanks, Steve. We totally appreciate and hear your comments. And as always, there are very good ones. I think we're actually quite aligned on our goals for the ground floor in terms of like detailed floor plans or sort of the evolution of this distinction of FPA and OPAA or other publicly accessible space. That's again kind of our effort to. We are still very early in design. I know it might not feel that because we have been talking about this project for quite some time, but in the scheme of the entitlement process and general, design documents, we are very early in design. We're not really even at schematic design, which is semantics, but the first phase where you're really stamping out, massing, general locations of where things go, general materiality. So all that's to say, as we progress, things get more detailed. And that's exactly kind of what you've seen here today as we've introduced this more detailed distinction of where the space is and how the suites might be able to go. It's just that trying to show our progress as we've progressed the design. So we can certainly continue to provide more detail on what we think is fitting for the ground floor. But at this stage of schematic design, this is kind of as detailed, like we don't even have a floor plan for the upper floors yet. So stay tuned. We've absolutely committed to the RFI for, civic and cultural space. We've done that from the beginning. It's in our PNF. We'll put it again in the DEIR. We've committed to that. And again, in terms of exactly where that space goes, it's highly dependent on design progression, the user as well. We imagine that this A Street suite would make a lot of sense, just given it will be the most visible, highly trafficked for quite some time until NECO's fully extended, and also the more substantial in size compared to other areas. But again, nothing has been envisioned or set in stone, and we really want to make it flexible so we can deal with that later down the line. And might be a frustrating response by can't be, entirely transparent or known today, but know that the core and the general buckets of our intent for this space is there. And just bear with us as we progress through design. In terms of the elevations for A Street, it's a great point. We've kind of cut off the map, at least for this presentation at NECO, really just to focus on what has shifted in our plan since many have seen it last, and that's really been focused on the waterfront. A Street, A Street is where it is, where we can't raise a portion of A Street. It's a city street. That being said, we really are prescribed in meeting the elevation that exists today, and that 244, 284A will be meeting as well. We're maintaining a consistent street wall with that project. And with that does mean it's at 16.6, and we will be thoughtful in how we employ some other resiliency strategies, including dry flood proofing, et cetera. Again, nothing's been settled yet, but there'll be.
Lauren, I would just add that the elevation of the spaces that we've set for resiliency, the 21'6" elevation, when compared to the existing elevation of A Street, is 5.5 feet difference, which if you imagined a 5.5 foot wall on A Street, the architecture was trying to balance the connectivity to the street and the sponsoring of street life. So we strategically located the A Street floor at the existing A Street elevation. So it's an iterative process, and we've been developing this over a long period of time.
Thank you both for that comprehensive answer. I'm going to kick it off to Jamie, who has his hand raised and might have kind of a further question about the original publicly accessible space question, and then I'm going to go back to the chat. Jamie, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Kelly. This is a great diagram. I mean, it really, I think, shows the challenges that you have in terms of, as you mentioned, transitioning the grade from A Street up to our resilient floor level. This is not the only project that we're going to have this issue on. This is going to be an issue all over the city as we continue to create, resilient, flood resilient landscaping along the waterfront and trying to transition to existing street grade. So, I mean, I think this is really helpful in showing how you've accommodated, your parking garage entry and loading on Binford Street, right? Which is looks to me like that's the best location for it, not off A Street or anywhere else. So, you kind of prioritize your public spaces on A Street and on the waterfront. So, I mean, I appreciate Steve's, request for specificity, but all these buildings are going to be here a very long time. They're going to, the Chapter 91 licenses are typically at least 65 years. I mean, who's going to be a tenant in what space? You're not going to ever be able to answer that question at the time the building is being, designed. You're many, many years away from being able to even engage with a potential user of the space. So I think, more importantly is making sure it's a flexible design that can accommodate a wide range of uses over a very long period of time, and then it's resilient over the lifespan of the building. So I mean, I think this is really going in a pretty good direction. But I just, I am, I understand your relationship to Chapter 91 and wanting to make sure you meet the standards for FPAs. But, the idea of the other publicly accessible space, I'm just kind of curious. Are you sort of saying that will be FPA space, but you don't want it to be, dictated or regulated or controlled by Chapter 91? Or is it actually something that's more like a facility of limited accommodation? Or I think it's an interesting concept. I'd like to know a little more about what you're thinking.
If I could respond to that, I didn't get engaged starting yesterday. When we planned Fan Pier.
Can I get an answer to the question from the client, please, or the
Yeah,
presenter,
hey
please?
Steve, can we let the proponent speak? And then I want to make sure I get to other people as well. We can come back to your comments as long as we've gotten through everyone else first. Thanks. Go ahead, 232.
Thanks, Jamie, for the comments. I think, and again, we'll take feedback from this group if this distinction is confusing or not the right way to present it, but our kind of approach here has been, this site's very unique, as you pointed out, in the sliver of Commonwealth tidelands that we have. So we want to acknowledge that, and we've actually taken that and exceeded it quite substantially. So we could just be saying, okay, the only FPA, the only publicly accessible space you'll see in this entire ground floor is 7,500 square feet. We could absolutely have taken that position and done that. That's also not how we build our buildings. We don't think that's in the best interest of any project that we build, or creating an activated space for the neighborhood and the people above it. I think the 105 is an excellent example, and our most recent example of how we approach the ground floor experience, and making sure that it's a space that is as porous as possible. So that's just what we do. With that, we've kind of set out to try and make the distinction of saying that's our intent, but in terms of FPA, we have to follow the tidelands, from what we understand, and that takes place in Commonwealth tidelands, and to the extent that it needs to, private tidelands, and the portion of landlocked tidelands has the majority of sort of that other space. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and Lauren, if I could just chime in, this is Stephanie Krull with VHB, and I'm on the 232 team. We're trying to work through with DEP what their potential jurisdiction could be in landlocked tidelands. They're not necessarily interested in seeing FPAs located in that area because they can't regulate them there. Although there is a caveat in the MEPA regulations that we're trying to work through with them that might, alter that. But so, we're trying to have the trade-off between what's in landlocked tidelands, what's in private tidelands, and try to make DEP happy as well as far as the formal designation. And, as Lauren's been saying, from a user perspective, you won't know the difference.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, guys. I do want to move on to a slightly different topic. We have a couple questions in the chat about the changes to the dock space, and if there's the possibility of dock space for non-powered boats at the southern end of the channel.
Thanks, Kelly. Yes, so the evolution of the dock space, which again was more of a suggestive water feature. I think we've thrown around like a few words in early days on what that might be, like a lookout, a touch the water moment, a dock, like a very suggestive design nod. As we have progressed, as we've worked through comments and feedback we've gotten as well from key stakeholders, abutters, and also furthered our site constraints, we don't believe a dock is feasible. Channelside had similar constraints, particularly for our site. It's even more challenging because we're narrower. So as we navigate substantial change in the tide or the water level in the channel, it's about what 10+ feet swing on average days. The width of the site that we have, the frontage we have, there's also a sewer outfall and then the water intake for the pump house. So all to say, there's actually like quite a lot going on in our frontage in the channel, and then you are battling just the mathematical equation of frontage and change in the tide. It just doesn't work. We also want to be complimentary and do acknowledge that there is a dock that already exists down the channel by Lolita. And in terms of an art launch, 244, 284 has committed to that in their Chapter 91 process, from what we understand. So we're not looking to be duplicative, and are acknowledging our physical site constraints as well.
Thanks, Lauren. And now I want to pass it off to Bud.
Hi, good morning, everybody. That's a good segue to my question. As more and more of the parcels along Fort Point Channel get filled in, it would be great to see in each of these presentations a more comprehensive drawings of how your site fits into everything else that's either under construction or now reached final design to the north of you going towards Lolita, so we could really see how all these pathways flow and work together along the Harborwalk, et cetera. I've lost track of the famous FEMA berm. You mentioned it earlier. I don't even know whether it ever finally got approved, but I'm curious to know how what you're now doing here fits into that, and sort of what levels of review you're going to have to go through to integrate that in whatever emerges from that whole process.
Yes, thank you. Both great questions. First, in terms of general context, totally hear you. Not in this presentation, but we are working on a better rendering to kind of show our project in the context of the abutting projects across the channel. So hopefully that will be forthcoming in our next public meeting or BCDC meeting. In terms of the berm, I will also kick it to Stephanie on our team to opine in greater detail, but in short, the 4 Point Resilient Infrastructure Project is alive and well. The city is most recently engaged AECOM as the designated consultant to further the design and engineering of that project. I believe that happened 1 or 2 months ago. So from what we understand, that team is getting fully up to speed. They've collected design materials from the groups along the channel and are digging in. We've requested an all hands meeting, so we're working to schedule that with the city, all abutters, AECOM specifically, and the city's team on this project, to make sure that we're all coordinated. We've had I would say very open communication, frequent meetings with Related and Gillette ourselves to make sure that we are connecting and coordinating, but the piece with AECOM, the city, will be integral and huge. So as soon as they're up to speed, there'll be more meetings to come on that. And Stephanie, is there anything?
Yeah, the things that we do know are the selected elevation of 21.5 feet BCB that the entire berm is going to meet. And so that's what our conceptual design is carrying. We're not able to provide more details specifically of what's under the ground. So what you see is just kind of the surface, because that's known and that's something that's under the applicant's control here. But we are definitely coordinating on it. We're integrating it into the site. The project will not be built without this. So, as far as timing with FEMA, with the project, either way, it's going to get done, because just the project just doesn't work if it's not integrated into here.
And I think maybe just to add on to that, I think the goal all along is to have that feature kind of integrated into the landscape design, so that it doesn't feel like you're on a flat site and then there's this big berm that feels like a resiliency measure. I think the goal is really for the experience of the landscape, for that feature to continue to evolve, but be integrated in a way that the overall grading feels integrated. It feels like a public open space. It doesn't feel like this big infrastructural piece on our site. And I think the connections with the development to the north and as the development to the south and the resiliency, project comes into more focus, I think that will continue to evolve. But I think it's been something that's been really critical to our approach in terms of how we're thinking about the site from the very beginning.
Good, thank you.
Next up, Sarah McCammond has her hand raised.
Hi, Sarah.
Sarah, if you're speaking, you might be muted. If you're also still finding the unmute button, that's fine too.
Kelly, you know me so well. I was looking for the unmute button. Thank you, everyone, for this presentation, and for Bud asking one of the questions that was on top of my mind about the berm. And I guess what I would like to know as a sort of a follow-up to that is, are you all considering a plan B should the 4-point resilient infrastructure project not be funded? And, I think that's an important consideration. So I'm just curious on with that, if you're planning, on a plan B in case it doesn't come to fruition. And then just curious, we've got the great slide here up, and just wondering why we're keeping the Harborwalk that as the edge of the water at 16 and not elevating that. I understand that the Gillette campus would be at a different elevation, but we handle that on the other side of the pump house, having the elevation in front of 15 NECO be different from what the elevation will be closer to the pump house on the other side. So had a question about that. And then in regards to the dock, I would respectfully request consideration of taking that money that you would have put into that dock and thinking about other ways to use it. And one suggestion that I have is expanding the existing dock at 4-Point Pier. That was always a phase 1 condition, and the expectation was that would be enhanced, perhaps going with an ADA compliancy going out the other way. So just a couple of ideas there. And just checking back on my notes, my apologies for not being better organized and what I wanted to say, but that I think that really covers the points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. First, we can tackle the Harborwalk elevation at 16. So that portion will also be consistent with 244 to 84 A Street, which, again, all we can do, since we don't control, obviously, beyond our sight line, which is this kind of black dashed area here, all we can do is hopefully provide a seamless connection for future flexibility for this pump house parcel. And that could be, extending this Harborwalk to 244, 284 A Street. So this would be one consistent elevation. And you can also jump in if you have any other rationale or reasons. I would also add, this area is particularly complex to raise with the tunnel underlying the site. Next.
Yeah, and
sorry.
I'll jump in just on this item. I mean, I think as is consistent with part of the development to the north, I think some of the goals with the boardwalk is to accommodate and be consistent with the existing seawall that exists there. And so we are transitioning down to that level, and again, continuing conversations with the city about kind of the long-term plans to the south as well. I think the design as currently, conceived of, right, has the flexibility if that was envisioned holistically across the district to be raised to accommodate that. But based on the conversations with the city to date, we're currently meeting the existing elevations at the 16.
Okay, I'll double check my notes. I thought it was a little higher on the other side, so that's probably me just getting my numbers mixed up. And just a really quick additional thing that I wanted to say was, is there a reason that the loggia is no longer part of this plan? because that provides a shade and
Oh, you're talking
some
about like
entrance
kind
of
of
the
the
water.
pergola that exists in
Oh yeah,
Binford
pergola. I
today.
always forget what they're called.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. I think this structure here by the head house is sort of our design nod to what is currently there. But there will be also more opportunities for shade and, protected spaces from the sun in our landscape design that improves upon, this tiny park that's there today, which also brings me to my next question or comment response to yours on the dock. I don't think the trade-off of is entirely linear. While we've also eliminated the nod to some type of water feature dock aspect, we've substantially improved the grade of the entire site. We're offering a park that is 3 times the size that it needs to be, and FPA that is roughly, 4 times what we're required to provide. So we are quite literally stretching on everything, and have certainly put that sort of public contribution to work, which folds into your next comment on the berm, and what we
Oh.
would do if it doesn't get.
So Lauren, before you jump there, I just want to also point out that there are aspects of the Fort Point Channel Watershed Plan and the South Boston Waterfront Municipal Harbor Plan related to watershed activation that don't require actual, physical activation of the watershed, but things that support it. And so things like the dragon boat storage and the public water fountains and some of the other features actually satisfy the waterfront activation component of those requirements. So it's not that we just eliminated the dock, but we kind of traded it out already for other items. So sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, no, thank you for flagging that. That's another great point. Another thing we're adding here, but the berm will absolutely be designed and built along with this project, irrespective of the success of FEMA. But from what we understand, it is tracking along, and we'll continue to monitor it, but it will be part of the development either way.
Thank you. I'm gonna hop to a question in the chat, but I'm gonna go to Chris, who hasn't had a chance to speak, and then we'll go back to Steve. So Mary Kay would like to know how much visitor parking will be available, and is there any way to ensure its affordability?
Yeah, that's a good question. We will have, about as many spaces that are currently on that surface lot today, in our below grade garage. So it will be similarly available, as transient parking. And then we'll have, we're actually able to preserve, almost all of the spaces that are currently on Binford Street, in the interim condition, and are actually net adding surface parking spaces on the street in the fully extended condition, which is great. And in terms of, ensuring its affordability, I think it will be, we'll make sure it's market driven.
Great, thank you. I want to pass the mic off to Chris Mancini.
Thanks, Kelly. And thanks, Lauren, and everyone for the presentation. I'm sorry I came in a little late and missed the beginning, but I just wanted to amplify what Sarah had said, and what some folks in the chat are, that my understanding from going through the 244 to 284 A Street process was, with all these developments so close together, you contributing back towards the existing plans that are in place, instead of making multiple docks every 20 feet, that there really is an opportunity here to add to the infrastructure that's going in from the other projects. And I just wondered if you were, how in contact you were with those project proponents at this point, or maybe it's something for the future.
Yeah, and in terms of infrastructure, Chris, are you talking about the berm specifically?
No, sorry, I was talking about the dock specifically.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I mean, in short, we are in contact with the other butters. We've had multiple meetings with Related and their design team over time, similar with Gillette, and have been apprised ourselves, keeping an ear to the ground on their Chapter 91 hearing process, public meetings over the past, I guess 4 or 5 years. So we're coordinating, and we also don't want to duplicate uses, and have focused a lot of our contributions on our site again with the elimination of a whole building, the contribution of a bigger park, publicly accessible space on the ground floor. That answers your question.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Steve, you're up.
Okay, thank you again. First of all, I want to commend the proponent for the improvements made to the Harborwalk and the South Bay Harbor Trail in the expansion of width from 8 feet to 12 feet, and also in the reversal of where the cycle lane goes relative to water's edge. And those were two important improvements. With regard to the dock, I'll go back to what I said earlier in terms of not only what's being proposed, but how advocacy organizations are putting their foot down. We've worked on watershed activation plans dating back to 2003 in multiple iterations, including a more recent iteration led by Save the Harbor. Yet we look at the watershed infrastructure proposed, and it's pretty much what's being built in Medford, Massachusetts at the Mystic River with development. This is Boston, Massachusetts, premium waterfront real estate, and we're talking about possibly extending a dock by some amount. I proposed in my letter, we could go back to the watershed activation plan and we consider Channelwalk, which is a floating walkway for the length of for at least these 3 property owners. That's the scale. That's not even the scale we should be considering. But I'm surprised advocacy organizations and proponents aren't putting forward watershed activation components at a scale that of the projects are coming in. When I hear about storage for dragon boats, it's fine. When I hear about money for floating art, it's fine. That's 1/10 of the amount of investment that we should be looking at this point. And I don't know why we're considering these projects coming in some kind of poverty scale. These are a much larger scale, and the types of infrastructure investments that should be made should be at a much more substantial level. And I don't hear the advocacy for those kinds of things. So I would suggest people go back to the watershed activation plan, look at Channelwalk, look at what was proposed at scale, and start demanding these things from these proponents. It's already getting late, but Related Beal and National Development are at the table. If they were demanded, where is the money for these things, those things would happen. Related Beal is still in, as far as I know, they're still in Chapter 91 permitting. Thank you again.
Thanks, Steve. 232A, if you have any comments for that, we can address that. Otherwise, there is a question in the chat. Okay, oh, sorry, if you want to go.
Oh, no, I think I don't want to waste time, repeating similar responses, but I think, what has maybe historically been the case for other projects along the channel, I wouldn't paint this with the same brush in terms of our total public realm contributions. But I hear the comment.
Going back to the parking, Sarah McCammond had a question about the parking on Binford Street. Will the Binford Street parking be free for residents? Sarah, I hope I characterized your question correctly. If not, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, the Binford Street parking, Binford Street will be a city street, and it will continue to be run in the similar fashion that it is today, barring some change from the city.
Lauren, just to jump in, you talked about preserving some of the parking that is going to be eliminated on Binford Street. And my question was probably not well written, but on that preserved parking that you are providing, or that's how I interpret it, that you were going to replace those lemonade spots. Are they going to be free resident spots on the extension of Necco or somewhere on your site? Thank you.
Yeah, so they will be located on Binford Street and a couple on Necco, and both, again, will be operated the same in the sense that they are free spaces on a city street. The only thing I couldn't speak to is the city's intent over time, but we have no plan on changing how they're run.
Great, thank you. And then Charlotte had a question related to annual contributions to the water sheet activation program. Is that something that you guys are considering?
We can definitely consider.
All right, it seems like the questions are slowing down. If anyone has a question, we have a few more minutes. Please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I'm monitoring both. Gonna give everyone like a few seconds, but
I think
all
maybe
right.
the only comment that I don't know if we fully addressed, Sarah, your note on Dragon Boat being accommodated at 244, 284 A Street. And I can confirm they are not planning to accommodate that, which is also something that we've sought to complement. I think they committed to like 1,500 square feet for arts, community storage in a garage somewhere, and then storage for life jackets is what I've seen.
And their Chapter 91 application references dragon boats, but only to provide pathways that are large enough to carry them across their site.
And I think we might have gotten most of them, but
Okay, great. In that case, Al, I'm gonna kick it to you to close it off. Al, if you're speaking, you might be muted.
Here we are, 4 years into Zoom land, and you still forget you're on mute. That was great. Thanks, everybody, particularly to Lauren and her teammates, Meep, Craig, and Ian for the presentation and for responding to questions and comments. Thanks to everybody who attended, and particularly thanks for those who raised questions or comments and fueled the discussion. A recording of this forum and past harbor use forums are available on YouTube, and Kelly will be putting that link in the chat. You can learn more about Boston Harbor Now in general, upcoming events and what we do and everything else by going to our website, bostonharbornow.org, where you can sign up for monthly email updates, and you can obviously follow us on social media. And with that, thanks again to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
thank you so much, Al and Kelly and everyone for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of your
Thank
day,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.